Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an air personality, a news anchor, even a TV weatherman.
And John has been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Innertube.
And that became the name for this podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives, difference makers who really make a difference.
A while back, we talked to the lovely and talented Mike Hingson, who is somebody that John and I spent some of our frivolous youth with on college radio. Mike later went on to survive the 9/11 catastrophe. We talked to him about that, but there's something else that he has survived, and that is a passion for old-time radio. Hi, Mike.
Hi,
Mike. How did you get started with it? I'm just wondering. Did you hear old time radio when you were little? Is that how it got started, or how did it get started? You know, how did collecting get started?
So I remember in 1957, I was listening to, I think it was 57. I was listening to KNX out here in Los Angeles. And by that time, I had become a fan of the Kingston Trio and their song Tom Dooley. And I heard them say, on Suspense tonight, we're going to do the story of Tom Dooley. And I went, oh, what's that about? So I just decided to leave it on. And at 5 o'clock, this other show came on entitled Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, that I had never heard of. The man with the action-packed expense account, America's freelance insurance investigator. Anyway, I listened to that. That sounded pretty cool. And then I heard the Tom Dooley story, which very much paralleled the Kingston Trio song version. So, you know, one stole it from the other. Most people would say the Kingston Trio had their portable copyright machine with them and they stole it from somebody else. But either way, so I listened to that and that got me intrigued. And so I then started looking for other programs, and there were a couple of other programs on KNX. But then a couple of years later, my dad knew I was interested in this stuff, and I was listening by that time regularly to Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar, Suspense, Have Gun Will Travel, which is one of the few shows that went from TV to radio and not the other way, and then Gunsmoke. So anyway, he came across this article that said that another station out here, KHJ, was going to play syndicated reruns of The Shadow and another program called The Green Hornet, both of which I had never heard of, but he read me the article. So I started listening to them and just was very intrigued because all of these shows really gave you the opportunity to use your mind, such as it might be, as opposed to just having everything show up on a TV screen. And in fact, my favorite movies on television and shows on television made you use your mind. Like, for example, one of my favorite science fiction movies of all times is the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers with Kevin McCarthy, and not the same one that we have to listen to today. But anyway, the story being that these plants came down and then were invading the earth, and basically if you fell asleep and one had adopted your shape, it would then take your being and would become you, and you would just kind of disappear. But they didn't show any of that. It was all in your imagination. Radio was sort of the same thing for me. And I loved being able to imagine, and it just got really intriguing. And then so by 1968, I was starting to look for ways to collect programs, and I had the opportunity to get some. And then my father, who was working at Edwards Air Force Base, had someone that he worked with who, in fact, had collected a bunch of the rebroadcasts of radio programs from the Armed Forces Radio Network. and they let me borrow what they had so I could start a collection, which became the first set of programs that we used when I went off to UC Irvine, and the campus radio station started there. And by 1970, I had joined the station staff in 68 or early 69, but by the September of 1969, I was playing radio programs every Sunday night full time.
Yeah. That's
Now, you said that you got hooked on these in the late 50s. And I think when people think of old time radio or radio dramas, they think maybe 30s and 40s when it was flourishing. But these shows went on and on and on. Well, way into the 60s, was it? I guess Gunsmoke would have been on radio and television simultaneously in that situation.
Correct, until 1962. Have Gun Will Travel, as I said, came from TV to radio because there was enough demand for it. There were still some soap operas being broadcast into the 60s. Ma Perkins was one. And then, of course, the other thing that happened later was that people started producing new shows. National Public Radio, of course, produced Star Wars for radio. There was another series called Alien Worlds that was on for 3 years on NPR. A company, ZBS Media, Z with a zebra, started and produced a 13-week serial called The Fourth Tower of Inverness, which we played on KUCI faithfully every day.
How well I remember, yes.
Yeah, I was in by 8:30 every morning putting on a cart the episode of the day.
And now, kiddies, just like back in those days of yore, the whole family can once again huddle around that beautiful mahogany cabinet, slowly turn that great heavy dial, and stare blankly at the speaker as in your mind vague forms begin to shape themselves. Can you see the mad alchemist with the bent frame, Dr. Missoula?
Yeah, well, Good God!
Or the strange child, little Frida. She wears pigtails, smokes Havana cigars, and has no pupils in her eyes. Yet she can see thought forms. You will arrive at a place where you'll be able to be anywhere, whenever you wish. For the place where you will be is outside time and space.
And we had a lot of fun with those and other programs as well. And radio still continues to flourish. Of course, there's the long-time radio program, Harry Niles, The Adventures of Harry Niles, a private detective, and it's been on for many, many years and still continues to this day.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Michael, because I think in our new sort of blasted wide open media world, it's easy to say, well, audio shows, are a thing of the past. But I think in two ways, they certainly are not. One is that unprecedented efforts have been made to archive as many recordings of the older shows as people can possibly find. And I know there's this huge market for them. People trade for them. There's a buying and selling market. There are all these conventions all over the world. Have you ever been to one of those, by the way, an old, golden years of radio convention like that?
I haven't. I would like to, and I hope to get to one of these days. But of course, with COVID, that's more difficult. But I know a number of the people who have been and keep up with the goings on at the various conventions. And at some of the conventions, there have been recreations of some of the old programs. The interesting thing is that with the collecting of programs and the archiving of programs a couple of years ago, something was happening, for example, though, that was a little bit disturbing, and that is that there were some places that had some collections of Amos and Andy, and people started complaining that wasn't good and doesn't represent us. And the reality is it's part of our history, and they actually, and in some cases, succeeded at getting the libraries to get rid of those programs, which doesn't make any sense at all because it is part of our history.
At the moment, Amos and Andy are in the office discussing the Kingfish's contemplated venture. Look, Andy, I've been around the Kingfish long enough to know the kind of businesses he goes into.
No, I tell you, Amos, this time he really serious. Why, he even putting his own money into things.
Oh, he is, huh?
Yeah, that's the truth. The deal calls for $348, and the only outside money he got to get is what he ain't got himself.
How much is that?
$345.
I think there's one thing that maybe we should mention that we haven't mentioned yet, Michael, is that you are, how shall we say, differently sighted.
I am blind.
and the reason I want to bring that up, I normally wouldn't bring it up, but if you had mentioned that you...
He's racist. That's okay. Go
yeah,
ahead.
that's right. I'm biased. I'm biased. And but seriously, well, I've been joshing with Mike Hingson for 40 years, ladies and gentlemen. And
I've known John for quite some time now, and for no particular reason. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, continuing on with our thought. When you mentioned that you first saw Amos and Andy on television, really you first heard them. You were not aware that they were wearing black grease paint as they did on the TV show, right? That basically you were hearing them and enjoying the storytelling and the jokery.
Of course, the dictionary defines to see as to perceive. It doesn't necessarily need to be with eyes. So, but the point is, you're right. I didn't have any clue that we were dealing with a black issue. And I can appreciate people were concerned about that. But at the same time, it was no different than so many other shows.
So the old radio shows are out there if you want to listen to them.
They're all over.
Yeah, and there are entire radio stations, both virtual and actual, that play a lot of them. There's one Canadian station that has them every night, and in fact, I can get it from here. I can get it from New Jersey at night when I'm traveling around. So I listen to this one Canadian radio station.
Railway station.
Yes, this one Canadian railway station, and the train gets.
You sit in the lounge.
You know, it's a very comfortable lounge. So, but
what station? Do you remember the name? Of the call letters?
Well, it begins with C, so that won't help anybody.
Yeah.
I don't remember the call letters, but it's almost every night. Well, they're playing like.
There's one. It's in Pennsylvania. It's WNAR. And that one is a live station, but they also are on the internet. Yes. So I listen to it with my little Amazon Echo and tell it to play WNAR. One of the best and well-known stations is an internet station called Yesterday USA that's been on for like 30 plus years. Used to be run by a guy named Bill Bragg in Texas, and it's now being run. Bill has passed. To that big transmitter in the sky. And now it is being run by Walden Hughes and John and Larry Gassman, who are out here in Los Angeles. Walden was a frequent guest when Bill Bragg had the station and was asked to continue it, and he has. And so Yesterday USA, there is a red network and a blue network, just like on NBC for the longest time. And they do generally play different shows unless there's something special that they're doing that is common that they want everyone to hear. Like Gloria McMillan, who was a famous actress in radio on a variety of shows, recently passed, and they did the funeral for her last Saturday. So that was on both the red and the blue network. But Yesterday USA is the best station probably all around for providing old radio programs today for people to listen to.
YouTube has an entire channel completely devoted to them. So does Spotify.
Right.
And
Sirius XM has Greg Bell.
Yeah, that's right. And what I love about this is that if you don't know anything about this world, it's right at your fingertips. I think you could say, in fact, it's got to be true that these shows are now more available to a greater number of people potentially than they've ever been. If it's something that you find interesting or want to experience, they're out there for you.
Let's talk a little bit about the theater of the mind thing that we mentioned earlier, and that is that radio was sound only, and therefore they had to create a whole world. And as much as your mind worked hard, the sound effects people in old radio worked very hard to create something that your mind could then, finish painting the picture. And that was an art back in the day. as much as announcing was or acting was, to be a sound effects person for radio.
And some shows did it better than others. Gunsmoke was very well known for its sound effects. And they used all sorts of different things to create the sound. Well, Matt Dillon, you could always tell when Matt Dillon was walking because he always had the sound of spurs on his feet. His boots had spurs on them, so you always knew Matt Dillon from anyone else. But it was absolutely specifically ongoing that every time you heard Matt, you heard the spurs. But there were so many other things. You heard the coyotes at night, and even Matt and Chester would talk about the coyotes and one sounding lonely in the distance. You could hear train whistles of trains from on the tracks that might be some distance away, and all the other things of Dodge City and wherever they were.
Even if I only had $1. Oh, Miss Kitty, just one single $1.
You broke, Chester?
Well, yes.
Here you go.
Oh, no. Now, I just couldn't think of taking money from a lady, Mr.
Well, I'll take
except
it.
as a loan. Maybe I could. Excuse me, Mr. Dillon. I'll pay it back in just a few minutes.
You know, Kitty, you're a born soft touch.
Oh, well, if he needs it, Matt.
It's those sharps over there at the poker table that need it.
Oh, well, he can't get hurt bad on $1.
Chester's hurt bad when he loses 10 cents.
Yeah? Maybe he's lucky, Matt.
How so?
Oh, forget it, Matt. Just one of those nights, I guess.
Now, Dad, would a drink help, maybe?
Probably not. But I'll have one anyway. At least it won't do me any harm.
Okay.
Oh, well, I see the Marshal of Dodge is out carousing again.
Hello, Doc.
How are you, Doc?
Oh, my kitty, you look prettier in a basket full of sunflowers.
I remember hearing a Gunsmoke on the radio when I probably was 6. I used to go for the summers. I'd spend a week at Grandma and Grandpa's house, at both sets of grandparents. And they were still listening to these radio programs. And I just fell into the habit, I'd sit around with them and just listen for hours, In fact, we listened probably to the radio more than we watched the television together, which is saying something when you're 6. But I think, like you, Michael, Marshall McLuhan calls these cold media. What he means by that is you have to add the energy yourself to imagining it.
Right.
And you have to put the heat in from your perspective as a listener. And it's not a medium that does everything for you, like showing you the pictures and making sure that you see exactly like a hot medium would be something like movies and television. But what's so great about radio, and I still think it's one of the great mediums of all time, media of all time, is that it's cold, that you have to come across and live in it yourself. And once you get in that habit, I think it's really hard to break it.
Well, and in fact, should you? The fact of the matter is that with radio, you did have to use your mind. You did have to think. And if you, I don't want to say worked at it at all, but if you paid attention, you were drawn in and you became part of the show in that sense. And it didn't matter whether you viewed Matt Dillon differently than I or Amos and Andy differently than I. That wasn't really the point. The point was that you were drawn in and you were very much involved with hearing and becoming absorbed by the plot. And they would use voices, they would use sound effects, they would use music to help enhance the plot in various ways. And some shows did it better than others, certainly. But the reality is that it made you be a part of the show, which you don't get to do on television. You can look at a show today and you can go, yeah, I understand that, or I can see that, but you're not drawn into it the way you are on radio. And that's why radio is still popular today, even though we've gone more to talk radio and waste a lot of time on so many different things with that. But as you pointed out, both of you, there are so many stations that still do old time radios, the Sirius XMs and the Spotifys. And of course, Yesterday USA and other internet radio stations, and they're easy to find. Just search them, or you can learn a lot by going to Yesterday USA because they talk about other programs and other stations and so on as well.
That also gives the idea that this is not nostalgia in the purest sense of the word, and that is that people our age or people older than us who grew up with radio as part of their media diet, this would, if there are, especially in places like Sirius XM, where they're really, there's a fight for some channels and that sort of thing, and they're not going to waste a channel if they don't have to. So that means that there is some demand for this among people who are younger, who are just discovering it for the first time.
And I'm on several old time radio lists, and we see that all the time. People talk about younger people, or young people come on and they say they want to know more about things regarding old radio. There's also a number of organizations. There's the Radio Enthusiasts of Puget Sound. Probably the largest and most well-known is one called SPURDVAC. Let's see if I can do it. Society for the Preservation and Enhancement of Radio Drama, Radio Variety. I guess it's drama, radio variety, and comedy. SPURDVAC.
It rolls right off the lips, doesn't it? It's
yes, exactly.
Yeah. SPURDVAC, and it's like $20 a year to be a member. You can go to spurdvac.org. But it is it's absolutely one of the best places to really go, where you can even meet all of the old people who are still alive doing it and so on.
And that also brings to mind the wide variety of radio. I mean, you think of radio and you think of sound effects and everything. You think of the old time, like you said, suspense or Gunsmoke or something. But there were variety shows, there were comedy shows, there were information shows. There was as wide a variety on radio as there is on television today.
Oh, sure. And for years, there was a program on NBC called Monitor, especially on the weekend, that went for hours every day. They had everything from old radio shows, or some of the actors created their characters and they continued them. Fibber McGee and Molly was one. And they also had the news, and they had a lot of current information as to what was going on in places. And Monitor was on for many years on NBC. It isn't today, but people collect the old Monitor programs too, which is kind of fun.
Yes, that is.
And, it really, I think today, listening to radio, one of the most fun parts to me is the commercials. If you listen to a Jack Benny program, for example, from the 1940s, the program sponsored, for example, by Great Nuts Flakes with Jack Benny, the commercials, the middle commercial was integrated into the program. And what was the most fun is when somebody flubbed a line and they just went right with it. And it just became part of the commercial, part of the show. And no one ever thought about it. It was just the way it was. And everyone enjoyed it. And that's one of the things that made that particular show on that day such a one that everyone empathized with and had a lot of fun with.
Jack, don't you think I better rehearse the commercial once? After all, this is a new product.
Okay, Don, yeah, rehearse it. Gee, we'll be on the air right away.
Ladies and gentlemen, next time you go to your neighborhood grocer, why not ask for America's most distinctive flake cereal? Toasty, brown, sweet as a nut, Grape Nuts Flakes.
No, Don, not grapes. That's grape.
Oh, darn it. You will find that Grape Nuts Flakes are a thrifty buy in the big 12-ounce economy-size package. So be sure to look for the big red letters on the box.
Don, that was Jell-O. These are white letters, white.
So be sure to look for the big white letters on the box.
They're little white letters, little, Don.
So be sure to look for the little white letters on the box. They spell Grape Nuts Flakes.
There you go again.
Oh, what's the matter with me?
That's another thing that we can look to radio, and early television was like that too. And it was that radio was driven by sponsors. If you had a radio show, one of the first things you did was go out and secure a sponsor so you could get on the air, and then that sponsor was tied in to your show. Sponsors played a much bigger role than they do now in what went on the air.
Well, somewhat. I think that in reality, some shows actually started as syndicated programs and then were picked up by sponsors.
Yes.
Which was kind of cool. You had one sponsor for a program on radio, and if it was a half-hour program, probably there were 3 minutes of commercials at most. And that's why Jack Benny was so fun, because one of the commercials, the middle one, was integrated in as part of the program, which was perfectly okay. But even if you keep that same formula, it's still 3 minutes per a half hour. And for an hour program, it's like the Lux Radio Theater, sponsored by Lux Soap, for all the time that it was on the air from, 1935 to 1955. There was an opening commercial about Lux toilet soap and Lux Flakes. There were 3 acts, and there was a commercial between each of the acts, and in between Act 2 and 3, there was also a time for stations to identify themselves. So there were maybe 5 minutes of commercials, if I'm totaling it right, and the rest was truly part of the show. And today, again, we don't have sponsor loyalty to one sponsor sponsoring a program. So it's just television stations selling advertising, but advertising is so dominating it. There is so much that we see as opposed to as much entertainment, which is always a challenge.
If someone was going to get started, from the beginning, if they wanted to just hear a really good example of this kind of show, what would you recommend? What are some of your favorite individual episodes that would give us a good representative taste?
Well, again, from a humor standpoint, programs like Jack Benny are always funny. Phil Harris and Alice Faye. Phil Harris was a band leader. Alice was his wife. She was a famous actress. And Phil Harris was on Jack Benny's program for many years as the band, the Phil Harris and his orchestra. Phil Harris and his orchestra were the band. Then he also started his own program, and they put together an incredible cast of characters for the Phil Harris Alice Faye show. The most famous part of it was sponsored by Rexall Druggist. Gail Gordon, another famous actor, was Mr. Scott, who was the Rexall rep or boss who represented the sponsor on the program. And Phil and Gail Gordon got into all sorts of things. There was a guy named from his real name was Elliot Lewis, again an actor. He played Frank Remley, who was supposed to be a guitar player. Remley was an actual character on the Phil Harris and Alice Faye program. And again, there's just a lot of humor and just the byplay back and forth between all of the major characters.
Phil, I wanted to ask you about that. Say, what's that list you have there?
Oh, that's my Christmas list.
Oh? How's it coming?
Well, I got a problem on one gift.
Are you having trouble finding a gift for your favorite blonde?
No, I'm getting her a mink coat. You're the one I'm having trouble. You snapped at that like a rainbow trout, didn't you? Honey, you know you're the only woman in my life. You're at the top of my list, and I'm going to get you something real good.
Oh, Phil, you really don't have to get me anything. After all, I have you, dear. And that's enough for any woman.
I see what you mean. I'll cross your name off the list, and then
Drop that pen.
Alice, please, you're twisting my conducting wrist.
Oh, by the way, do you have Mr. and Mrs. Scott's names on your list?
I got his name down, but why do we have to get something for her, too? She's so hard to please. She's been spoiled.
Yeah, she's an old fuss budget. She never likes anything.
Oh, now that's not true. Mrs. Scott is a very nice person.
Hey, I got an idea, Curly. Why don't you pick a fight with Mr. Scott? Then you wouldn't have to buy him anything.
Oh, wait a minute, Frankie. I can't pick a fight with a sponsor. A sponsor in radio is something that's sacred. Like a white elephant in India. Besides, Scotty's a pretty nice... I'll get it.
Oh, hello, Harris.
Well, Mr. Scott, come on in, sir. It's a pleasure to see you, sir.
Well, thank you.
Hello, Mr. Scott.
How do you do, Mrs. Harris?
Hiya, Scotty. I'm here, too.
Well, this is a disgusting surprise.
Quiet, Jumbo, or I won't give you any peanuts. You know, this is a coincidence, Scotty. Curly was just talking about your wife.
Oh, something nice, I hope.
I wouldn't say that.
Pay no attention to him, Mr. Scott. I said some very nice things about Mrs. Scott, and you know it, Frankie.
All right, you said nice things. If somebody said it about my wife, I'd punch him right in the nose.
Wait a minute. Mr. Scott, don't believe him. Alice and I were talking about your wife,
Never mind, Harris. If anybody said anything nasty about my wife, I know whose rum-soaked lips it came from.
Curly, now he's saying something nasty about your wife.
So Phil Harris and Alice Faye Woodby won. A longtime run would, of course, be Jack Benny. One of my favorite, I think probably my all-time favorite radio program was one particular episode of a program called Command Performance. Now, Command Performance was a radio program that was really created for the armed forces overseas. So it was very much around in the 40s up into 1947 and 1948, but it was all of the actors and all of the celebrities that you would ever know back in those days volunteered to put their talents to work creating these programs that were not aired or heard in the U.S., but were only aired and heard by our troops overseas. And my favorite one from, I think it is February 15th, 1945, had probably the largest cast that I can think of right now of actors and actresses from that day. It was an hour-long comedy operetta about Dick Tracy. It was called Dick Tracy in B-flat, or for goodness sakes, is he ever going to marry Tess Trueheart? And you had Bing Crosby playing Dick Tracy. Dinah Shore played Tess Trueheart. The Summer Sisters were played by the Andrews Sisters. Of course, everybody got to sing in this. Other people that you would know about, Jimmy Durante with his nose was the Mole. Bob Hope was Flat Top. Frank Sinatra played Shaky, and it went from there.
Wow.
It was just an incredible cast of people. And it was just one joke after another. My favorite scene is the show starts out, Dick and Tess are going to get married. Everything is all set. The judge is there. Judge Hooper is there. He's gonna marry them and all that. And he says, Tess, do you take Dick Tracy to be your husband? And she says, I do. And Dick, do you take Tess Trueheart to be your lawful wedded wife? And he says, I do. Oh, good. Finally. And he says, and I now pronounce you. About that time, the phone rings. And it's the police chief, who's played by Jerry Colonna. And he says, and so Dick Tracy answers the phone. He says, I'm sorry, I have to take this. And he goes, Tracy on this end. And the police chief goes, police chief at this end. And then he says that there is a robbery at the bank. And I forget the specifics about the bank, the First National Bank or something. And so Tracy says, I've got to go solve this. Of course, so they're not married yet, right? So he sings a song about going off to catch a crooked mob. And then he drives away, and Tess sings a song about being left at the altar again. The song that Tess sings ends, and then you hear Tracy pulling into the parking lot, slams on the brakes, runs into the bank, and he says, this is Dick Tracy. Put up your hands, you swine. Nobody's here. And then you hear, drop your gun and turn around, Tracy. And Tracy says, if that voice belongs to who I think it does, I may never turn around. It's Bob Hope playing Flat Top. And of course, anybody would recognize his voice who knows that time. Anyway, Tracy says, if that voice belongs to who I think it is, I may never turn around. And then Bob Hope says, what a pleasure. I always wanted to have a gun in this guy's back. And Tracy says, yeah, you could pull it up a little bit too. And Bob Hope says, sorry, I was going to blow your brains out. I mean, that was just the quality for the whole show. It's my favorite radio program, probably of all time.
You guessed it, Tracy. I'm Flat Top.
Flat Top? How did you ever get a flat top on that egg-shaped head of yours? Well, now that you got me Flat Top, what are you going to do with it?
You're not going to like this at all. You'll probably hate every minute of it. You're really going to get the full treatment, Dad. Oh, what's going to happen to you?
Well, what's going to happen? I'd like to laugh a little, too.
I'm going to put you in the vault, pour a pitcher of cream over your head, and then throw in a tiger with a rough tongue.
Proceed. Dick Tracy fears not your threats. The author will find a way out.
Well, you'll never get out of this vault, you marble-headed hero. First, I'll close the steel door. Now I'll twirl the combination. And now I'll slide in the boat. There.
Hey, Junior, you forgot something. I'm still on the outside.
There was an interchange, too. There were big stars in other mediums that came onto radio, and then there were stars that radio created, right?
Well, Groucho Marx. Of course, You Bet Your Life was a radio program that also then went to television. Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. Bergen was a ventriloquist, and Charlie was his
a piece
sidekick.
of wood with painting on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Always my favorite show. Put a ventriloquist on the radio. Yeah, that works.
And it was one of the funniest shows on the air. And it was great. One of the stories that I've never been able to verify, but I think it's true. First of all, Charlie McCarthy battled with everyone.
Right.
And so, for example, he was always going after W.C. Fields. And there was one program that started out, Charlie said, our sponsor is Maxwell House. That's Friendship in a Cup. And our guest today is Mr. W.C. Fields. That's Friendship in a Hiccup. But they always went at it. And I understand that sometime in the course of their feud, Charlie said something and W.C. Fields grabs him away from Edgar Bergen, pulls out a saw and saws Charlie in half. I read it somewhere, and I don't know if it's true, but I wouldn't put it past any of them. That would certainly have flabbergasted Bergen. But at the end, before Fields died, they actually made peace, so it was okay.
Are you eating a tomato or is that your nose?
Very good, Charles. You must come down with me after the show to the lumber yard to ride piggyback on the buzzsaws.
Nobody's going to find me after the show.
Yes, they are. You'll be hanging in my window as a Venetian blind.
That makes me shudder.
Quiet, or I'll throw a woodpecker on you.
You know, I've always been very fond of our feathered friend.
Yes.
Large or small, tame or wild.
Blonde or brunette, yes. Bill, you have quite a collection, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have, Aunt Karen. I always have a very rare Australian duck-billed platypus.
How small is this bird? Do you have to have glasses to see it?
Yes, about 3 or 4.
Is it true, Mr. Fields, that when you stood on the corner of Hollywood and Vine, 43 cars waited for your nose to change to green? No.
Now, hey, you woodpecker's lunch. You know, Charles, many's the time I wish you could be here to fill that terrible vacancy.
In your heart, Mr. Fields?
Oh, in my fireplace.
Heard a couple of the Charlie McCarthy, Edgar Bergen shows, and I have to say the humor is so fast and so dense. I mean, the you know what I mean, the prattle and the it's so fast.
Sure.
It's almost it's really difficult not to think that there are at least 2 people in front of the mic.
Oh yeah,
you know, Bergen was at his peak an astounding talent.
Oh, absolutely. I regret never having had a chance to meet them. He lectured once at UC Irvine, but it was right during my show, so we didn't get a chance to meet him. So I was very disappointed at that. But he was. The only show that probably was significantly faster would have been a British show, and you got to understand British humor to really deal with it. But it's the Goon Show.
Oh my God, yes.
And of course, and the Goons, of course, included Peter Sellers.
Yes, Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan,
Gary Seacombe, and Spike Milligan.
Oh yes,
yeah.
And if you ever want to hear the godfathers of I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again, and Beyond the Fringe, and
Inspector Clouseau,
and Monty P, and the Fire Sign. Did I say Fire Sign Theater? Yes,
you didn't, but you just did.
Okay, they are the godfathers of that kind of anarchic, and of course they're descended in their own British way from the tradition of the Marx Brothers, but so crazy and so much more surreal. They have I forget why, but they're talking to themselves, and they always comment on the show. Like Harry Seacombe says something and then says, "Thinks to self, that wasn't much of a line."
Yeah. But you had to pay attention with your whole mind and body when they were on, because if you drifted for 5 seconds, you lost it.
Yeah.
And it took time to catch back up, and you had to catch back up. So they were so fast and so funny.
At the time, I was asleep in my electrified elephant hammock when through the pigeon hole flew a carrier pigeon. There was something strapped to his leg. It was a postman.
Letter for you, sir.
Thank you. Hurriedly, I tore open the letter. Inside was an envelope. With a message that said, "Report at once to MI file." The letter was written. The letter was written in a disguised voice. Hurriedly strapping on a fresh pigeon, I flew out the window.
Come in.
Captain Harry Seagoon reporting for duty as instructed, sir. I'm ready to die for the flag, bleed for my country, suffer great sufferings, and all for England!
You twit. Pull up a chair.
Well, they at one point, I'll just share with the audience, at one point in the Goon Show, just to give an example of how crazy things could be, they all agree that, all of the sound effects people in the studio have gone on strike. And so they agree that they'll do all of the sound effects themselves. And so one guy is trying to tie a shoe, and he says, I wonder what the sound effect for a shoelace is. And they go, that's the that's the sound effect. Who's to say no?
All of it live.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And it was all done in front of audiences too, or a majority of them. There were studio audiences for these radio shows.
Yes.
Yeah. So they were performing for live people and getting live laughs. Or maybe not.
There's so many stories. Marvin Miller, who was one of the most well-known radio announcers, and of course went on to be on a TV show called The Millionaire. He was Michael Anthony. He had this deep baritone voice and was a wonderful announcer. But he tells the story of being involved in so many different radio programs in the Chicago area that literally 1 week he did 90 different shows.
Wow.
And in fact, had to be taken by boat on Lake Michigan to go from one side of the city to another, just to get from one place to the other in time to be able to do the broadcast.
That is such a great story. I imagine that I used to imagine that that's what, at the top of his career, Orson Welles would be doing in New York City, taking taxis to and from the various shows that he was on at any one time, doing voices, being an announcer, being a producer, being a writer, right? And that he's just crisscrossing. And this is in the late 30s and throughout the 40s. He would be just driving all over New York City, going to every radio station and recording studio and doing these shows.
And make no mistake, Orson Welles was good at comedy as well. Jack Benny was ill in 1943 for several shows, and Orson Welles came on to take his place and was as funny as it could be. Those are also some of my favorite radio shows. And he brought his own cast of characters. I'm trying to remember the name of his secretary who on the show for these four. It was again a very famous person, but I'm trying to remember her name. And then there was Mr. Toodlequirtle, And at one point, one of the people said they were totaling up money or something. He says, "What's the total, Toodle Quirtle?" And they got that out without a flub. But he was incredible and was as funny as anyone could be, and carried those programs for the 4 weeks that Jack was out. The rest of the crew was there, but Jack was ill. And I think it was a pretty serious illness, but then he did come back.
Now, operator, I'd like to talk to Mr. Benny. Oh, his temperature went down. He checked out. Well, very well, I'll call him there. Goodbye. That's strange.
What's the matter? Did Jack leave the Arizona Biltmore?
Yes, it seems he's now stopping at the Jasmine Blossom Auto Court.
The Jasmine Blossom?
Hey, I just thought of something. Jasmine Blossom. That's J.B., the same initials as Mr. Benny.
That's right, Dennis, and I'm sure Jack will come home with some lovely monogram towels. Miss Harrington, remind me to call Mr. Benny first thing tomorrow morning at the Jasmine Blossom Auto Court.
Yes, Mr. Wells.
Excuse me. Come in. Well, it's those two merry madcaps from the soda fountain. Hello, fellows.
Hello, Mr. Wells. Here's that comedy sketch we wrote for you. There's a little mayonnaise on it, but it's very jolly.
Thank you, fellows. By the way, would you like to stay and hear your little gem?
I don't know. Should we stay, Gil? We can't stay. That fat lady is waiting for her cheeseburger. Oh, yes. Let's go. Wait till I open the door.
Well, let's see what they've written here. So far, nothing but mayonnaise. A little crude, but it'll get by. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our feature attraction this evening, we are going to present a mystery melodrama entitled Death at Midnight or the Murder Case. Now, in this drama, I will play the role of Inspector Wells of Police Headquarters. Bill, you'll be my assistant, Sergeant Harris, and Dennis, you will be my other assistant, Sergeant Day. It is your duty to help me solve a horrible crime.
So, Mike, if anybody, let's review here. If anybody is interested in catching up with Old Time Radio, listening to some of the shows, maybe getting involved, how would they do that?
I would definitely suggest they go to sperdvac.org, sperdvac.org, and join. It's $20 a year. They have a large library of programs and also just probably the most knowledgeable collection of people on radio programs and so on. If people want to listen, definitely I suggest yesterdayusa.com. If they want to hear Gunsmoke, there's a program called WRCW Radio, and that's all Gunsmoke 24 hours a day.
Oh my gosh.
And there's WRCW Radio 2, which is other Westerns like Have Gun Will Travel and Fort Laramie and the Cisco Kid and others. Then they also have WRCW Crime Story. So there are three different ones, and they do crime stuff. I mentioned WNAR. That's another place to go. Sirius XM is definitely well known. Greg Bell is well known in the industry, and also talks a lot about the history as he's doing the different shows. So there are a lot of places to go, but if people want to really get involved and learn about it and interact with people, best place to go is Sperdvac. As I said, Radio Enthusiast of Puget Sound Reps is another place. They can find that online and go there as well. There are a number of old radio groups, and all you got to do is Google them, and they're out there. Hey, by the way, you guys, why do radio announcers have small hands?
I don't know why.
We pause for station identification. Anyway,
this is giving me nightmares of being back on college radio.
We pause.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
You guys be well.
Thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
You can get in touch with us by email. We're at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @MInnertube. Capitalize the M and I.
Our webpage is Musical Innertube. That's musical spelled with two A's, .libsyn, that's spelled LIBSYN.com.
The Innertube is available on Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio Podcasts, and anywhere that you get your podcasts. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.